based on the real testimonies of soldiers who fought at Gallipoli, 1915. Nobody warned us about the flies. They told us about the bullets. They told us about the terrain, the cliffs, the ravines, the ground that offered no cover and demanded everything. They told us about the Turks, who were fierce and numerous and fighting for their homeland, which makes men fight differently than men who are fighting for an idea. Nobody mentioned the flies. By the third day they were everywhere. By the fifth day everywhere was no longer an adequate word. They were the air itself, the constant moving darkness of them, the sound that did not stop. Not a buzzing. A roar. A low, continuous roar that started at dawn and ended at dark, and by the end of the first week you stopped hearing it the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat, because the alternative was madness. They came from the dead. That is the thing you have to understand. The dead were everywhere, and the dead were in the sun, and the sun was relentless, and the flies moved between the dead and the living with a democracy that I found, at the time, almost philosophically interesting and now find simply unbearable to think about. You would be eating, if you could call it eating, the grey tasteless business of forcing food into your body because your body required it, and you would watch them land on your bread. You would wave your hand. 40 would lift. 40 would return. You would wave again. They would return again. After a while you understood that the waving was a ritual with no practical function, a performance of resistance that changed nothing, and you stopped performing it. You ate the bread. You did not think about where they had been 5 minutes before. Or you thought about it and you ate anyway, because hunger is a more immediate argument than disgust, and the body is a more immediate authority than the mind, and after enough days in a trench the body makes most of the decisions. My name is William Carey. Private, 1st Battalion, Lancashire Fusiliers. I am writing this in August of 1915 from a hospital bed in Alexandria, which is cleaner than anywhere I have been in 4 months, and which I cannot sleep in because the sheets are too white and the silence is too loud, and every time I close my eyes I am back on the ridge with the sun and the sound. I am writing it because someone should. Not the version they will print in the newspapers. Not the version with the heroism and the noble sacrifice and the language that makes it mean something larger than it is. The other version. The version with the flies. We landed at Cape Helles on the 25th of April. I will not describe the landing in detail because other men have described it and the descriptions are accurate, and I have nothing to add except that it was exactly as terrible as those descriptions suggest, and also somehow worse, because descriptions preserve sequence. This happened, then this, and the actual experience had no sequence. It was simultaneous. Everything at once. The noise and the water and the men falling and the shore that seemed to recede as we moved toward it, and the specific physical sensation of being in a body that very much wants to continue existing and is not certain it will. I reached the shore. Many men did not. I did not stop moving, which is what they train you to do, and the training worked, which is its own kind of horror, that your body can be made to keep moving through things that should stop it, that the training reaches deeper than the fear. By nightfall we had a position on the ridge. By the second day we had a trench. By the third day we had the flies. There was a man named Corporal Ellis who had been in South Africa and claimed to have seen flies before. "You haven't seen flies," he told us, on the third morning, with the authority of a man whose prior suffering has been professionally validated. Not like this. In South Africa, someone threw a tin at him. He stopped talking about South Africa. But he was right, in the way that people who have seen slightly worse versions of terrible things are right. There was a quality to these flies, a density, and a persistence, that felt less like a natural phenomenon and more like a punishment. As if the peninsula itself was producing them. As if the ground was generating them in direct proportion to what we were putting into it. Which, I suppose, it was. Mehmet was on the other side of our wire. I did not know his name was Mehmet until much later, until the ceasefire in May, when we met in the open ground to bury the dead, and he told me his name and I told him mine, and we shook hands over a stretch of earth that I will not describe, that I have spent 4 months trying to describe to myself in terms that make it possible to have seen, and have not yet succeeded. But before that, before the ceasefire and the handshake and the names, he was just the voice. There is a particular acoustic quality to a narrow trench system. Sound travels in ways that defy the logic of distance. You can hear a whisper from 20 meters away and miss a shout from 5. For the first 3 weeks I heard Mehmet's voice every day without knowing his face, without knowing his name, knowing only the voice itself, the particular cadence of it, the way it dropped at the end of sentences, the laugh that appeared unexpectedly in it at irregular intervals. The laugh bothered me at first. Not because it was inappropriate, though it was, by any reasonable measure, inappropriate, but because it was genuine. It was the laugh of a man who has found something actually funny, not the performance of a man laughing to prove he isn't afraid. I lay in the trench at night listening to that laugh and trying to understand how a man could find anything actually funny in this place, and I could not work it out, and it bothered me, and I kept listening for it anyway. The flies were worst around the dead. This is obvious. This is a statement so obvious it barely qualifies as a statement. But obvious things, when you are living inside them, acquire a texture that no amount of prior knowing prepares you for. There was a man ours, from C Company, who had been caught in the open on the 4th day and had come to rest in the ground between the trenches, which was no man's land in the most literal sense, land that belonged to no one because no one could reach it without being shot. He was there for 11 days before the ceasefire allowed us to collect him. 11 days. In the sun. I will not describe what 11 days in that sun does to a man. I will only say that the flies knew, that they had known from the first morning, and that for 11 days they moved between him and us with their perfect indifference, their complete disregard for the categories we had constructed: enemy, ally, living, dead, clean, unclean. And I thought about this often, lying in the trench, waiting. The flies had no sides. The ceasefire came on the 24th of May. It was arranged for the collection of the dead, which had accumulated to a number and a state that made continuation of hostilities impractical for reasons more logistical than moral, though the letters home described it in moral terms, which is how letters home work. We came out of the trenches in the early morning. They came out of theirs. I had been imagining this moment for 7 weeks, the moment of seeing, of the faces belonging to the voices, of the distance between us collapsing from 8 meters of charged and lethal air into nothing, into hand-shaking distance, into close enough to smell. I had been imagining it with a mixture of feelings I couldn't fully separate from each other: fear, curiosity, something that might have been longing, which surprised me. What I had not imagined was the flies. They were worse in the open. Of course they were in the open. There was more of everything, more sun, more smell, more of what the sun and the days had made of the men in the ground between us. We worked in this, all of us, Turks and British, side by side, with our faces arranged in the expression that men wear when they are doing necessary things that they will spend the rest of their lives not thinking about. Mehmet found me near the eastern edge. He was exactly as tall as I had imagined from his voice. Dark eyes that were doing what all of our eyes were doing that day. He looked at me for a moment and then he extended his hand and I took it and we shook hands, and neither of us said anything because there was nothing available in either of our languages that was equal to the moment. His friend brought cigarettes. We smoked them standing in the open ground among the dead and the flies and the May sunshine, and it was one of the strangest and most human experiences of my life, and I have been trying to find the right words for it since, and I have not found them, and I am no longer certain the right words exist. The ceasefire ended the next morning. I was awake for it. I heard the first shot 5:52 by my watch, and within 2 minutes it was as it had always been. I will not pretend this was more complicated than it was or less complicated than it was. It was exactly as complicated as it was. Two men who had shaken hands over the dead were now, again, attempting to add to the dead. The training worked because the training was designed to work, to make the body perform while the mind was occupied elsewhere, and the body performed. The flies did not notice the difference. They had never noticed the difference. That was the thing about the flies, the thing I keep returning to in this hospital bed in Alexandria with its white sheets and its terrible silence. They were the only honest participants in the entire enterprise. They made no distinction between sides. They observed no ceasefires. They had no training, no ideology, no letters to write home. They simply went where the dying was, which was everywhere, which was all of us, which was the whole peninsula baking in the sun. Everything else, the flags, the orders, the reasons, the carefully constructed categories of us and them, the flies ignored completely. I have spent 4 months finding this unbearable. I am beginning to think it might be the most truthful thing I witnessed out there. Mehmet is alive. I know this because on the last morning, before we were moved, I went to the edge of the trench and he was there. We looked at each other across 8 meters and I raised my hand and he raised his, and that was all, and I walked away and I did not look back. He was alive at 6:15 on the morning of the 14th of August, 1915. What happened after 6:15 I do not know. I am getting better, the doctors say. The wound is healing. The fever has passed. In a few weeks I will be returned to duty, which means I will be returned to the peninsula, which means I will be returned to the flies and the heat and the 8 meters and all the rest of it. I think about Jimmy Patterson, who had a theory about angles and was wrong about it. I think about the man from C Company who lay in the sun for 11 days. I think about Mehmet's laugh, arriving unexpectedly out of the dark, genuine and inexplicable. I think about the flies. Nobody warned us about the flies. But here is what I know now, that I did not know in April. The flies were not the worst of it. The worst of it was getting used to the flies. The worst of it was the morning I sat down to eat my bread and did not wave my hand, and did not think about where they had been, and simply ate, and felt nothing. That was the morning I understood what this place was doing to us. Not the bullets. Not the dead. Not the 8 meters of open ground that nobody could cross. The getting used to it. That was the thing. Private William Carey, 1st Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers, was discharged from Alexandria Military Hospital in September 1915. He returned to the Gallipoli Peninsula and served until the Allied evacuation in January 1916. He survived the war. He never spoke about it publicly. He kept a diary. This is it.